So for many years now, probably it's been decades now, I've been reading, sharing, commenting on A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. Anybody not know the Christmas Carol? It's ubiquitous in our culture. Actually, when I talked to my grandchildren about it, they said they've seen the Disney version. So that's their take of it. But I find it an incredibly profound text in many ways, and very congruent with our teaching. Because it's about a man who overnight changed his karma. And not only did he change his karma overnight, but extremely change his karma overnight, the trajectory of his life overnight, which of course is what our practice is about, transformation. And the thing I really enjoyed about it is it's not from doing deep meditation. He didn't have a profound enlightenment experience like the Buddha had or masters have or we can have of knowing the nature of his mind. He just got his life. He got perspective on his life. And because he was able to really see that, I'll go into the story. The story tells it all. So I think it's wonderful because stories, we can have teachings, which are very kind of intellectual, cognitive teachings, but often a story will grab us a little more and inspire us a little more, as we know from, than just teaching. So I want to share with you A Christmas Carol today. I won't be reading the whole thing, but I'm kind of picking parts, kind of put it all together. Let me say something about Dickens. He was an interesting, we're talking about the early 1800s, mid-1800s, when for many of you may know, this is when industrialism, the whole economy of England was changing. There was really, very little regulation. So therefore, the plight of the poor and the workers was quite extreme, the poverty. And Dickens is an interesting man because he grew up in a family, his father was a clerk, and there was some degree of stability. And then when Dickens was around 12, his father had gotten deeper and deeper into debt. They didn't have credit cards yet. So many Americans were in debt, but we have credit cards. So we carry the debt. In those days, there were no credit cards, and in those days, you went to prison. There was debtor's prison. So I'm not sure the dynamics of it, but at a certain point, his father was arrested, and not only was he put in debtor's prison, but the whole family was put into debtor's prison with him. And you can probably read about it. Except Charles. Charles was 12 years old, and he didn't go into debtor's prison, but he went to work in a factory, where I guess the conditions were not only abysmal, but it also opened his eyes to the, to the suffering of the English working class, especially for children. I mean, he went to work, he was 12 years old. And so I think that was 3 or 4 years he spent in that, which for him was a traumatic hell of that experience. But it really opened his eyes. His father was released and sort of brought stability back into the family. And Charles was able to return to school, get some education. And then he got into reporting. And one of the things that affected him was he was able to, he would report on what was going on in Parliament. And in those days, there were lots of debates because there was a whole movement of kind of social reform, about poverty. Because in those days, not only were there debtor's prison, but there were poorhouses. So basically, if you were poor, you were criminalized and you were sent to poorhouses or workhouses. So anyway, it was a very abysmal situation. So we heard these debates, which also opened him up to kind of, perhaps there are solutions. But what he also, it opened him up to the indifference of so many who weren't in that poor situation, how indifferent so many people were to the situation, life condition of their fellow human being. So it was very interesting in looking at his life, because he was very strongly a social reformer. And yet he realized that the social reform movement, which was more social and political, many people were indifferent to. So if you look at the Christmas Carol, he weaves in this story of personal transformation and lots of kind of stories about the joys of Christmas and everybody enjoying themselves, if you remember the book, he weaves in these scenarios of the poverty and desperation of so many people. So it was kind of interesting because he felt that if you packaged it in a way like he did, in a Christmas story, and you put in those references, and you do it in a way that awakens people's heart, it could get the message through that often the political or social message wasn't able to. So it was really kind of fascinating to see what he was up to. So, are we ready? So just settle back. I'm going to tell you a story. And we remember when we were children. We love, hopefully, that people tell us stories. So in the beginning, we're introduced to Scrooge, tight-fisted Scrooge, a squeezing, wrenching, grasping, scraping, clutching, covetous old sinner. Nobody ever stopped him in the street to say, "My dear Scrooge, how are you? When do you come see me?" No beggars would even ask him for money. No children asked him what time it was. And nobody, because his whole energy was, even the blind men's dog appeared to know him, and when they saw him, they'd run away and pull their owners into corners. He obviously radiated, his aura was what? Negativity, big time. But he didn't care. Actually, it was the very thing he liked, to edge his way along the crowded paths of life, warning all human sympathy to keep its distance, was what the knowing one called Scrooge. So, we open up, so this is a little background. So this is about Scrooge, and we meet him, he's busy in his counting house. What does he do in his counting house? Counts money. Yeah, so he's a man of business. And he had his, he's got his Scrooge in his counting house. We encounter him. We learn a little about the way he's seen and that he couldn't care less. The door of his counting house was always open so he could keep his eye on his clerk, who sat in a dismal little cell, a sort of tank, always copying letters. Scrooge had a very small fire, but the clerk's fire was even smaller, that it looked like there was only one piece of coal in it that he couldn't replenish because Scrooge kept all the coal in his office, because to him everything was a waste of money. Right? It was all about money. And all of a sudden the door opens and in comes his nephew, who says, "A Merry Christmas, God save you." And then what do you think Scrooge says to "A Merry Christmas, God save you"? Humbug. And Scrooge's nephew, who I think is basically a very good guy, right? "Christmas humbug, uncle? You don't mean that, I'm sure." "I do. Merry Christmas. What right have you to be merry? What reason have you to be merry? You're poor enough." "Come, uncle. What right have you to be dismal? What right have you to be morose? You're rich enough." Very interesting. Right? It's like, okay, if I'm not allowed to be happy because I'm poor, then you should be in bliss because you have all that money. Right? So I think a good response. Scrooge had no answer for that. So all he could say was, "Bah, humbug." And the nephew says, "Don't be cross, uncle." And Scrooge says, "What else can I be when I live in such a world of fools? Merry Christmas, fie on Merry Christmas. What's Christmas time but a time for paying bills without money, a time for finding yourself a year older, but not an hour richer, a time for balancing your books and every item in them termed through rather than If I could work my will, every idiot who goes about with Merry Christmas on his lips should be boiled within his own pudding and buried with a stake of holly through his heart. Are you getting a sense of where Scrooge is at? He's what we would call what? A miser, right? He's a miser. I mean, he's devoid of any human affection, any human feeling. He lives for only one thing, money. And yet it doesn't give him any happiness at all. That's what a miser is. Nephew, you keep Christmas in your way and I'll keep it in mine. But you don't keep it, said the nephew. Leave me alone. And then the nephew, who is Scrooge's sister, and we'll learn about Scrooge's sister, she's died. And actually, on her deathbed, she said to Ebenezer, and because she died in childbirth, she said, please always watch out for him. And so his nephew says, there are many things from which I have derived good, but from which I have not profited, I dare say. Christmas among them. I am sure that I've always thought of Christmas time when it's come around, beside its sacred name and origin, as a good time, a kind of forgiving, charitable, pleasant time. The only time I know of in the long calendar of the year when men and women seem by one consent to open their shut-up hearts freely and to think of people below them as if they really were fellow passengers to the grave and not another race of creatures bound on other journeys. And therefore, Uncle, though it has never put a scrap of gold or silver in my pocket, I believe that it has done me good, will do me good, and I say, God bless it. What do you think? Pretty good? Yeah. So again, it's funny, I think of our times when the expression, monetize, everything is monetized. I'm sure you know exactly what that means. And yet, he's saying, there's a whole part of life that's really the most essential part of life, it's not about money. It's not, you don't put an economic value on it. It's something which is the essence of our humanity, and that criteria is most essential. Anyhow, the talk together does not end good, and his nephew invites him to come for Christmas dinner, and Scrooge, of course, says, no, bah humbug, I want nothing to do with you, your friends, your new wife, and he leaves. And soon after he leaves, there's another knock at the office door, and there are two gentlemen there, books and papers in their hands. They bow to him. Scrooge and Marley, I believe. Marley was his original partner, who has been dead for 7 years, died on Christmas Eve 7 years ago. Have I the pleasure of addressing Mr. Scrooge or Mr. Marley? Mr. Marley has been dead 7 years. He died 7 years ago this very night. But we have no doubts that his liberality will be well represented by his surviving partner, said the gentleman presenting his credentials. At the ominous word liberality, Scrooge frowned, shook his head. So these two men are coming for what? They're coming for a donation to a charity. And he says, at this festive time of the year, Mr. Scrooge, it is more than usually desirable that we should make some slight provision for the poor and destitute who suffer greatly at the present time. Many thousands are in want of common necessities. Hundreds of thousands are in want of common comforts, sir. And Scrooge says, are there no prisons? Plenty of prisons, said the gentleman. And the workhouses, are they not still in operation? They are. I wish they weren't, said the gentleman. The poor laws and the treadmill laws, are they not in full vigor? Both are very busy, sir. Oh, I was afraid from what you said that something had occurred to stop them in their useful course. I'm very glad to hear it. And then the gentleman said, under the impression that they scarcely furnish Christian cheer of mind or body to the multitude, a few of us are endeavoring to raise a fund to buy the poor some meat and drink and means of warmth. We choose this time because it is a time of all others when want is keenly felt and abundance rejoices. What shall I put you down for? And again, this is a time when what? In our own culture, we have Christmas dinners, we give a lot of presents, I mean, it is, of course we have credit cards, but it is a time where at least outwardly we express a lot of, joy and we nurture abundance, right? In the way we go about it. So he says, so what shall I put you down for? Scrooge replies, nothing. Oh. You wish to be anonymous, sir? Still hasn't quite gotten who he's dealing with here. I wish to be left alone. Since you asked me what I wish, gentlemen, this is my answer. I don't marry myself at Christmas, and I can't afford to make idle people merry. I help to support the establishments I've mentioned, such as the prisons, the poorhouses, They cost enough, and those who are badly off must go there. And he said, but many can't go there, and many would rather die than go there. If they would rather die, they'd better do it and decrease the surplus population. So again, those you remember your history, your high school economics, you remember there was a whole, was it Adam Smith, the surplus population? Anybody? It's sort of like, those people who are not productive in society, they're the surplus population, right? And they're of no account. So he says, let them die because they're in surplus. They're not needed. Right? So Scrooge says, it's not my business to know about what's going on with this surplus population. It's enough for a man to understand his own business and not to fear with other people's. Mine occupies me constantly. Good afternoon, gentlemen. So this is kind of wonderful, right? Because this is where it begins. We see a man we see a man in the present, right? We see how he is. But we don't understand him, do we? We don't understand what created him. See, in the same way we see ourselves, we see lots of other people, as they are. But we don't see the causes and conditions that created them, so we can understand them. But we see him. And he feels very much that his way of doing things and his way of living and his way of thinking and responding is what? Absolutely correct. And anybody who does not believe the way he does and follow the way he does and have the same values or interests and he does is what? A complete idiot. And he wants nothing to do with them. Again, it's not unknown, is it? It's not unknown. And again, poor Bob Cratchit, his clerk, Scrooge just gives him a bad time even about getting Christmas off. I mean, don't forget, for those of you who are younger, in those days, there was no, 5-day work week. There was no holiday pay. I mean, people just worked and children work. So, and everybody was at the beholden of their employer. So, so Scrooge, he resented having to give his clerk 1 day off a year with pay, right? As if that was the most benevolent thing imaginable, like Cratchit was taking advantage of him. And yet you don't think me ill-used when I pay a day's wages for no work. That's Scrooge looking at Christmas. Christmas is a poor excuse for picking a man's pocket every 25th of December. But I suppose you must have the whole day. Be here earlier the next morning. So that's his Christmas greeting to Bob Cratchit. Yeah, so then just skipping ahead. So, Scrooge walks home after closing up. He comes to his home. He lives alone. It's very dark because he's saving on electricity. Did they have electricity then? Maybe not. They had gas they have gas and candle. But anyhow, he's, saving on it. So it's very dark. He comes upstairs. There was this little scene where when he gets home, on his door, on the knocker, all of a sudden he sees the face of Marley, remember? And he thinks it's indigestion, so something he ate. So anyhow. So he comes home, goes upstairs, goes to his room, closes all the door. So, and then strange things begin to happen. Right? He hears noises. He hears doors opening and closing. He hears bells ringing. He hears the sound of chains coming up the steps. And he's losing his composure. He's in his safe little house. So doors are flowing, things are booming, sounds are coming. All of a sudden, without a pause, whatever it was coming up the steps, even though he had locked the door, came right through the door. It's Marley's ghost. Remember, Marley was his partner. Looked just like Marley, except around his middle was a chain. It was long and wound about him like a tail, and it was made, for Scrooge observed it closely, it was made of cash boxes, keys, padlocks, ledgers, deeds, and heavy purses wrought in steel. So that's the weight he's carrying with him. That's making that sound. And he's transparent. And Scrooge says, "What do you want with me?" "Much," says Marley. "Who are you?" "Ask me who I was. Who were you then?" "In life, I was your partner, Jacob Marley." "Please sit down. Could you sit down?" He was scared. "I can do it." "Then please do it then." And then they went through a kind of a back and forth because he could see that Scrooge was not believing that he was real, and kind of Marley raised the ante, shaking his change and making horrible sounds, and all of a sudden Scrooge was silent. They have a back and forth, blah, 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 blah. Crying, screaming. All of a sudden, the phantom takes off this bandage that's been around his head, and his jaw drops down onto his chin. Scrooge now falls upon his knees, clasping his hands before his face. "Mercy, dreadful apparition, why do you trouble me? Man of worldly mind, do you believe in me or not?" I do, I must. But why do spirits like you walk the earth, and why are they coming? Why do you come to me? And the ghost says, "It is required of every man, woman, every human being, that the spirit within them should walk abroad among his fellow human beings and travel far and wide, and if that spirit does not go forth in life, it is condemned to do so after death. It is doomed to wander the world, oh woe is me, and witness what it cannot share, but might have shared on earth, and turn to happiness." Right. So he says, if, I'm wandering now, and visiting human beings and seeing what they're doing, because I never did that when I was alive, when I was a human being. I was doomed to do it now as a ghost. And it's funny, in traditional Buddhism that comes from Asia, there is this tradition of what they call hungry ghosts, which are sort of like ghostly figures that are just never fulfilled. They just wander like ghosts in the world. And many of them, it's because in life they always had these insatiable desires that they could never meet. So now they just wander like ghosts. "You're fettered," said Scrooge. "Tell me why." And this is very important, The ghost says, "I wear the chain I forged in my life. I made it link by link and yard by yard. I girded it on of my own free will, and of my own free will I wore it. Is its pattern strange to you?" Scrooge trembled more and more. "Or would you know the weight and length of the strong coil you yourself bear? It was full, as heavy and as long as this one. 7 years ago, that's when Marley died. You have continued to labor on it since, and it has grown heavier and heavier." So again, in terms of the way we see the world, that fundamentally, it's not externals that imprison us. It's internals that imprison us, right? This is very important. And Marley is saying to him, these chains that I'm now burdened with, I forged them. I consciously forged them in life. Right? I can't hold anybody else responsible for the actions that I undertook knowingly. And this is, I think, very meaningful to all of us, right? That at some point we stop blaming or holding responsible others, whatever that other is, for the condition of our hearts and minds. The external conditions are one thing, but the condition of our heart and mind is under our purview, under our control, as we'll learn. And so this is, I think, a very powerful message that Marley's giving him. "Oh, Jacob Marley, speak comfort to me." Jacob Marley, he's not enjoying the message. "I have none to give. It will come from other regions, conveyed by other ministers. I cannot rest, I cannot talk to you, I cannot stay, my spirit never walked beyond our conference house." Anyhow. So basically, Marley's saying, I'm not the one to help you. Others will help you, right? But Jacob, he says, Scrooge, "you were always a good man of business." Right? "Business," cried the ghost, wringing its hands. "Mankind was my business. Humankind was my business. The common welfare was my business. Charity, mercy, forbearance, benevolence, these were all my business." Anyhow, I don't need to comment much on this. I think we understand. And I think especially these days with the busyness of our lives and the omnipresence of society and cultural issues and values, it's very easy to lose, for our hearts to lose the way. Right? So this is not an unknown situation that he's dealing with. "Pray, Marley, don't be hard upon me." He said, "I've sat beside you many days, invisible. You have not seen me. But I'm here tonight to warn you that you haven't yet a chance and a hope of escaping my fate. And he says it's hope and a chance that I've procured for you. So somehow Marley has intervened at some level to kind of give experiences that are going to unfold for Scrooge going forward. And again, anyhow, it goes on and on and on. When Marley leaves through a window. I don't know if you've probably seen the movie. He leaves through a window, and when Scrooge looks outside, the air was filled with phantoms wandering hither and thither in restless haste, moaning as they went. Every one of them wore chains like Marley's ghost. They were all linked together. None were free. Many had been personally known to Scrooge in their lives. He was quite familiar with one of them. The misery with them all was clearly that though they thought to interfere for the good in human matters, they'd lost their power to do so. They were ghosts. So even though they were now aware of their own chains and of the suffering of those they loved or care about or society, because they were ghosts, they were unable to do anything. Which ghost gives us a message to do it while you have a body. All right, so Scrooge goes to bed, hoping it's all just a bad dream. The experience. And he has his first visitation, remember? So Marley says you'll be visited by 3 spirits. He was a strange figure, like a child, yet not so much like a child, like an old man, which gave him the appearance, and he was a very strange appearance. He had children proportions, and yet he had age. Anyhow. But the strangest thing about it was that from the crown of his head there sprung a bright light, clear light of jet, which made everything visible, and which was doubtless the occasion of its using in its duller moments. He had a big cap, right, which he now kept under his arm. And I think for me this light is the light of awareness, right? And we'll understand that. The light was on. He could see everything clearly. And that was the light that radiated from this spirit. Anyhow, he had a very strange belt on, which had all kinds of lights. Anyhow, he's basically a kind of phantasmic figure that keeps changing his shape. He's young, he's old, he has multiple arms, he has few arms. He's a shapeshifter because he represents the past. And many of us in the course of our life have shaped it. Our shape has shifted, right? Both our physical shape as well as our emotional shape, relational shape, and this is the spirit of that. And so he's the spirit of Christmas past. Scrooge asks him why he's come here. I'm here for your welfare, your reclamation. Rise and come and walk with me. And they walked about the world. Took his hand. And, he travels through time. He's a time traveler. And all of a sudden he comes to, see, this is very important because now we're going to learn what made Scrooge, right? He didn't come out of the womb the way he was, a miserable human being. So, just paraphrasing. So, basically the story of Scrooge is his mother died at childbirth, which was in those times not unusual. His father, Scrooge, the young Ebenezer, his presence always reminded his father of his loss of his wife, and so he wanted him not around. So at a very early age, he basically sent him to boarding school and never saw him, and he never came home. So we see him on a Christmas, and nobody's there. He's a young boy all alone. Obviously not happy. Anyhow. And all of a sudden, Scrooge begins to remember that boy, right? Which was him. All of a sudden, he gets in touch with that boy in him. And not only the sadness of the boy, but like that the boy had imagination, that the boy had imaginary friends. He had kind of populated his whole world. All of a sudden, he kind of remembered. Anyhow, he remembered a little more about his childhood. All of a sudden, at this age, where he was, I think he was like a teenager by then. All of a sudden, his sister Fan comes and says, "Dad's forgiven you. Come home." So Ebenezer can't believe it, but he's brought home. His father re-embraces him, brings him back in the family, and Ebenezer begins to have some semblance of a normal life. He gets a job as a clerk with old man Fezziwig. I don't know if you remember Fezziwig. Fezziwig is a store, is an owner of something like what Scrooge ended up doing. But he was he was a happy man. He wanted the best for his employees. He took good care of them. He really was not focusing on money, but was very focused on giving them quality life, and he cared about them as human beings. Old Fezziwig. He gave them a big Christmas party, and everybody was happy. And Ebenezer loved him. And as Scrooge observes that, and they take him through various instances, and he remembers not Fezziwig, but how he was at that time, and how he glowed in the presence of Fezziwig, being treated that way. And so they're observing this Christmas party, and Scrooge is saying, how wonderful this is. And the ghost says, a small matter to make these silly folks, like all his employees, full of gratitude. Small, says anyhow. Yeah. Why? And Scrooge is going, well, how wonderful he was. What's the big deal? So he spent 3 or 4 pounds, to buy food for his employees. That's nothing. Why should you praise him? And all of a sudden Scrooge says, but it isn't that, Spirit. He has the power, this is Fezziwig, to render us happy or unhappy, to make our service work light or burdensome, a pleasure or a toil. So his power lies in words and looks and things so slight and insignificant that it's impossible to add and count them up. Wow, look at the happiness he gives. It's worth a fortune. This is Scrooge. Right? So you can see something's beginning to change as he remembers and touches into past experiences that were actually very positive and really brought out, the best things in him, which he had completely forgotten. And I think many people, when they recite their history, that's one of the reasons I'm doing this thing on trauma, we remember what? Negative. There's something perverse about our minds, that we remember the negative. And we forget the moments of goodness that also cultivated us. And then he was also, he had a fiancée, right? And they end their relationship. And he says, why? Because another idol has displaced me. And that's where you look to for cheer and comfort, that I would have tried. And he says, but what idol has displaced you? And she says, a golden one. Anyhow, so basically she breaks it off with him. And he's okay with it. Little pang, but he's okay, because he's focused on what? Gold and getting ahead, and and business. And eventually he gets into business with Marley. They sort of screw Fezziwig, take over his business. There are other things. And finally, Scrooge says in a broken voice, "Remove me from this place." Oh, because Scrooge, he takes him, he shows him this very happy scene of this big family and Christmas and da-da-da-da-da. And all of a sudden the husband says to the wife, "Guess who I saw in the street today?" And she says, "Who?" Sort of, "Old Scrooge." And they kind of go, "Oh, that poor man." I mean, so he sees that his fiancée, found a place, found a husband, found a life, had children, all very happy. And Scrooge, missed out on all of that. Anyhow, there's a whole interaction, but the bottom line is the night ends. Scrooge goes back to bed, or the first one. And then he's awakened again. He goes back to sleep, and then he's awakened again, and it's now... All right, so the first part is we see the past. We see the karma of Scrooge. We see the cause and conditions that have led him to the place where he is in his life. And this kind of introspection, this kind of understanding, and not seeing ourselves as we are today as like, this is the, many people say, well, this is the way I am. No, it's not the way you are. It's the way you were created by causes and conditions. You were not born, your mind was not formed when you were born. Your mind had no thoughts, no experience. It was unconditioned. You are the way you are because of all your experiences and how you related to all your experiences and how you internalized all your experiences and how you lived out all your experiences. That's why we are the way they are. And that's very profound, right? Because inherent in that is what? Freedom, as you'll see. Okay, so now he's his next visitor is the Spirit of Christmas present. He's a big jolly kind of Santa Claus kind of figure, Father Christmas. Anyhow, and he takes him around, and he takes him to Bob Cratchit's house, and Bob's poor, but he's got a loving wife, he's got a family, they're very poor, but they're all together, and they're happy, and they're having a nice Christmas dinner, and blah, blah, blah. And then he's seeing, and how even poor people, with the little they have, can be happy in their relationships. He sees Tiny Tim, remember Tiny Tim has the crutch, and all of a sudden, Scrooge said, well, what's going to happen to him? Hung his head. And Scrooge goes, oh, tell me he won't die. And guess what the ghost says to him? Yes, he will die if nothing changes. So what? So what if he dies? He'd better do it and decrease the surplus population. He's throwing his own words back in his face, right? Because now all of a sudden it's personal, you see? It's not surplus population like, this abstract concept. It's like, oh, these are human beings, like Tiny Tim. I mean, this is why it's so important, this idea of how we need to walk up among our fellow human beings so they're not ideas in our head. That we see their living condition, which is, again, what Dickens was trying to do in this text, right? Is introduce people to the condition of their fellow man. And the ghost says, forbear the wicked cant until you've discovered what the surplus is. Will you be the one to decide who shall live and who shall die? It may be in the sight of heaven you are more worthless and less fit to live than millions of people like this poor man's child. And so he visits the Cratchits, he visits other people, he goes to his nephews, and they're all having a party, and everybody's happy, and then he travels around the universe, the world, and he goes to miners, and In their little hovel, they're celebrating Christmas. And, people on a watch, people and sailors out at sea. He just sees people in all these areas capable of fellowship and happiness and in spite of everything, enjoying each other. And when he gets to his nephew's house, they're talking about Scrooge. And Scrooge says, I can't be angry at him, because who suffers by his ill whims? He's the one who suffers. Anyhow. It's very interesting. His nephew says to all his friends who were there, that, again, he's just amplifying Scrooge's loss by not coming. He's losing. He loses pleasanter companions than he can find in his own thoughts. Does Scrooge have pleasant thoughts? Are Scrooge's thoughts pleasant companions? No. Sometimes we need pleasant companions, right? Rather than saying stuck alone in our own thoughts, or his moldy office, or his dusty chambers. So I mean to give him the same chance every year, whether he likes it or not, for I pity him. He may rail at Christmas till he dies, but he can't help thinking better of it. I defy him if he finds me going there in good temper year after year and saying, Uncle Scrooge, how are you? And if the end of that, he just leaves 50 pounds to his poor clerk when he dies, it makes all my efforts worthwhile. And I think that's often what people say, well, what should I do with these kinds of people? We have toxic people in our lives, toxic relationships, toxic family members, what do? We just do our best, wish them well, be pleasant with them, be kind to them, right? And hopefully, over time, that may have some effect. So during that night, much they saw and far they went, and many homes they visited, and always with a happy end. The spirits stood beside sick beds, and they were cheerful. On foreign land, and they were close to home. By struggling men, and they were patient in their greater hope. By poverty, and they were rich. In almshouses, hospitals, jails, and miseries every refuge were vain human beings, and their brief authority had not made fast the door and barred the spirit. He left his blessing and taught Scrooge his precepts. So, we talked about the past, right? And the conditions. And now the spirit of Christmas present is showing Scrooge another way. This is important. We can have all the understanding we have about the causes and conditions that have created us, and et cetera, but they seem so real to us, you know what I mean? Because this is our life, and these are the causes and conditions that we've developed in. So even though we may understand, have insight into ourselves, it doesn't necessarily mean that we know there's another way to live, to be, you see? And what the spirit of Christmas present is showing him by taking him around to all these different situations where people, even if they're poor, have the capacity of happiness, of having meaningful relations with each other, you see, of all that, and of having good thoughts. And he's showing him that there is another way. And just before they end, this is very, Scrooge says to the spirit, forgive me for asking, but there's something strange protruding from your skirts. Is that a foot or a claw? It might be a claw, but there is flesh upon it, was the spirit's sorrowful reply. Look here. And he opened up his robe, and there were two children, wretched, abject, frightful, hideous, miserable, kneeling at his feet, clinging to the garment. And the ghost says, "Oh man, look here, look here." They were boy and girl, yellow, meager, ragged, scowling, wolfish, where graceful youth should have filled features out, a stale and shriveled hand like that of age, where angels might have sat enthroned, devils lurked and glanced out menacingly. No change, no degradation, no perversion of humanity in any grade through all the mysteries of a wonderful creation, as monsters half so horrible as these. Scrooge was appalled. He wanted to say, "Oh, but these are just children," but the word choked. And Scrooge says, "Children," he says, "Spirit, are these your children?" And the Spirit says, looking at them, "No," he basically says they're man's. He really says they're yours. They're your children. And they cling to me, appealing. This boy, he is ignorance, capital I. This girl is want, capital W. Beware of them both and all of their degree, but most of all beware this boy, ignorance. For on this brow I see that written which is doom, unless the writing be erased. Deny it. Slander those who tell it to you. And Scrooge says, "Have they no refuge or resource?" And the Spirit says, "Are there no prisons? Are there no workhouses?" It's funny, before I came here, I looked up, in our highly advanced culture, I looked up the demographics of our America's prison population, right? And we have a significant amount of human beings in prisons, don't we? And what do you think the demographics are? Most are high school dropouts. Most come from poverty, right? And there are other demographics, but I mean, and basically, this is what he's saying, that if we don't heed them when they're children, it will come back, they'll end up in what? Becoming criminals. So it's good to know that, it's not good to know, maybe terrible to know, that he was seeing something that we still do today, and still we lock up the poor because of their conditions or whatever, of ignorance and want. Their life takes their path. And then finally, we come to the last one. Slowly, gravely, silently approach. It was shrouded in deep black garment, concealed its head, its face, its form. There was only one outstretched hand. Tall and stately, it came beside him. Scrooge says, "Am I in the presence of the ghost yet to come, of the future?" He didn't talk, pointed. "You're about to show me the shadow of things that have not happened, that will happen in time before us. Is that so, Spirit?" Kind of nods his head. Although well used to ghostly company by this time, Scrooge feared the silent shape so much that his legs trembled beneath him, and he could hardly stand. He was filled with an uncertain horror to know that behind the dusky shroud there were ghostly eyes fixed upon him. But all he could see was the spectral hand in one great heap of black. "Ghost of the future, I fear you more than any specter I have seen. But I know your purpose is to do me good, and I hope to be another man from what I was. I am prepared to bear you company and do it with a thankful heart. Will you not speak to me?" So we see, in just these two visitations, profound, all of a sudden his past opened up to him. He sort of remembered who he had been and the positive things in him, but he also realized he just saw the turn that had happened in his life, that had led him to where, remember, when he opened up this story just an hour ago, or less, he was totally embodied in who he was. There was an inch of doubt that his way of living and seeing things was absolutely fine, and that he did not need anybody, did he? Right. But now, having traversed his past and having seen in the present possibilities for a different life, he says, looking forward, but I hope to be another man than from what I was. I'm prepared to bear you company and do it with a thankful heart. Will you speak with me? The hand would not speak. Lead on then. And they went, and basically he basically first goes to the counting house, where he hung out with all his wealthy buddies, and they're talking about somebody who had died. Oh, he died. Oh. So, so what? You think anybody's going to go to his funeral? Probably not. Well, maybe we should go if they're, making a good dinner. So he doesn't know who they're talking about, right? But he looked to where he usually sat, and the place was empty. But he still didn't get it. And then, he goes through some other things, other places. Oh, then the ghost of the future takes him to this, this rag picker's den, of all these rags and different things, really like this horrible place. And who walks in but an undertaker and, a laundress and a charwoman or something. Anyhow, they come in with bundles. Basically, they have stripped the room of somebody who died, right? And, the pawnbroker had taken off the rings or watch or something from the dead body, and the other two women had brought, one of them had brought the bed, the sheets and the blankets, and another one had brought the drapes, and this the gown of the person who died. And they're talking about what a miserable human being he was, and who cares? And he died all alone, and nobody was with him, and and at least he treated us miserably while he was alive. So at least we should be able to, make some profit off his stuff. And so he sees that he still hasn't figured out who it is. Spirit, I see. The case of this unhappy man might be my own. My life tends that way now. Yeah. And then he's taken to actually a room where the dead person is. Anyhow. Yeah, so there he is, a man lying in a dark, empty house. Still the ghost pointed. I understand you. I have no the power. The spirit's trying to get him to pull the cover off the man's face. And Scrooge said, I don't have the power. And then Scrooge says, if there's any person in this town who feels emotion caused by this person's death, please show that person to me, I beseech you. He's saying, is there anybody, who cares that this man has died? And guess who he takes him to? Somebody who was a debtor. We had met this person earlier. He had borrowed some money. He was about to be put in in the pauper's jail or the debtor's jail. He had come begging Scrooge early in the story to just give him some time to pay it back. Scrooge, absolutely not. But he said, I have a wife, I have children. Oh, they can go with you. Anyhow, so he had, in the last couple of days, he had gone to beg Scrooge once more. And when he found out that Scrooge was dead, and he came home and told his wife that Scrooge was dead, that made them both happy. So there were some people who had a positive emotion for Scrooge. Anyhow, Dickens does not let up, does he? So they were happy, and then he takes them to Tiny Tim's place, the Cratchits, where Tiny Tim has died. So he shows them, there people can. With that, Scrooge says, but can you show me? I mean, does anybody really miss in a positive way somebody when they die? So he takes them to the Cratchit's house, where Tiny Tim has died, and then he takes him to his office. And Scrooge hastened to the window of his office, looked in. It was an office still, but not his. The furniture was the same. The figure in the chair was not himself. Like us, right? One day we won't be here. One day we won't be in our rooms. One day we won't be at our place of work, right? The chair will be empty. Yeah. And then he takes him to a graveyard. And he points to a gravestone. And Scrooge says, before I draw nearer to that stone to which you point, answer me one question. Are these, this is important, are these the shadows of things that will be, or the shadow of things that may be only? Still the ghost pounded down to the grave. Human beings' life foreshadows certain ends. If persevered in, they must lead. But if courses be departed from, the end will change. Say that's true. Please say that's true. Right? So again, this is very powerful for us, because he's saying what? We all have the trajectory of our life, right? And he's saying, is that like fate? I mean, is everything you've shown me about he's now realizing he's the one. Is this all going to happen? That's fate? Or is it, if things aren't changed, this may be what happens? This is profound, right? Because in this moment, he's touching into the inherent freedom that we all have as human beings, which is what? We can change. It's not fixed. Karma is not fate. Karma is simply the unfolding of causes and conditions. And if we change the causes and conditions, our life will change. Our future will be different. But he doesn't know that yet, so he's saying, please tell me, right? That things can be changed. Still the ghost pounded downward. If the courses of a person's life be departed from, say that the end will change. Say it. But just keeps pointing. He looks down. He sees the name on the grave as Ebenezer Scrooge. Oh no. Spirit, hear me. He clutches at the robe. Hear me, I'm not the man I was. I will not be that man in the future because of what was going on tonight. Show me, please show me this, that I'm not beyond all hope. Good Spirit, please have your nature intercede for me. Please pity me. Please assure me that I may change these shadows that you've shown me by an altered life. The hand trembled a little bit. I will honor Christmas in my heart and try to keep it all year. I will live in the past the present and the futures. The spirits of all three shall strive within me. Shall not shut out the lessons that I have learned. Oh, please tell me that I can sponge away the writing on the stone, which of course is his death. In his agony, he caught the spectral hand. It sought to free itself, but he was strong in his entreaty and detained it. Yet the spirit, stronger yet, repulsed him. Holding up his hands, he saw an alteration in the phantom's hood and dress. It shrunk, collapsed, and dwindled down into a bedpost. He's back in his bed. So he's had quite a night, hasn't he? And this is very important, because many of us have had moments of insight, right? Moments of clarity, moments of possibility, of change, transformation, etc. We've all had those moments, and yet our problem is what? We awake in the same bed that we went to sleep in. So the key thing is what's going to happen now, right? He's had this transformative experience. What's he going to do with it? You see what I'm saying? Like we all have these moments of insight, possibility, but what are we going to do with them? See, this is the question. Yes, and the bedpost was his own, the bed was his own, the room was his own. Best and best of all, the time before him was his own to make amends in. I will live in the past, the present, and the future. The spirits of all three shall strive within me. O Jacob Marley, heaven, Christmas time be praised. I say it on my knees, on my knees. He is happy. Because he's awake now. He's awake now to the causes and conditions that have created him. He's awake to his possibilities. And he is happy that he still has time. He still has life. I don't know what to do. He says, I'm as light as a feather, happy as an angel. He's light. You know the word enlightenment? It's like light. He's lighter. He's shed that heaviness in one night. Incredible. I'm giddy as a drunken man. Whoop. Anyhow. He's just so excited that he's still alive and everything is, he has all this time and he laughed. He never laughed. It was a brilliant laugh. Told the boy to go out and buy a goose and send it to Bob Cratchit's house, right? And he goes to visit his nephew. Shows up at their Christmas day party, and he's the life of the party. They can't believe it's him. They're delighted. And then he's in the street and he runs into, remember those two men who came into his, asking for money that he was saying? He runs into them, they kind of walk away. Scrooge comes up with him, whispers something into his ear, and the man goes, "What? My dear Mr. Scrooge, are you serious? If you please, not a farthing less, and a great many back payments are included in it." So he's obviously saying, I'm going to make a very large donation. And Scrooge says, don't say anything. Please, come and see me. Will you come and see me? Thank you. I'm much obliged to you. See, I'm much obliged to you to giving me this opportunity. Right? We think they should be obliged to us. But Scrooge says, no, I'm obliged to you because you're giving me this opportunity to express my gratitude, to express my connection with my fellow beings. Yeah, he went to church, he walked around the streets, he saw people hurrying to and fro. He had never felt that any walk could give him such happiness. In the afternoon, he went to his nephew's house. Of course, the next day, Bob Cratchit comes in, Scrooge does this kind of thing where he pretends, oh, you're late, and then he calls Cratchit into his office as if he was going to bawl him out, and instead says, I'm going to give you a raise, I'm going to look after Tiny Tim and your family, I'm going to be generous in the future, and all that. And Scrooge was better than his word. He did it all and infinitely more. And to Tiny Tim, who did not die, he was a second father. He became a good friend, as good a master, as good a man as the good old city knew, and any other good old city, town, or borough in the good old world. Some people laughed to see the alteration in him, but he let them laugh. He little heeded them, for he was wise enough to know that nothing ever happened on this globe, on this globe for good, at which some people did not have their fill of laughter at the outset. And knowing that such as these would be blind anyhow, he thought it quite as well that they should wrinkle up their eyes in grins, as have the malady in less attractive forms. But in his own heart, there was only laughter, and that was quite enough for him. Anyhow, so that's the story of Scrooge. It's the story of the Christmas Carol. I hope you enjoyed the story. And like many stories, it has great meaning, personal meaning for each of us in our own unique way. Hopefully have been touched by Dickens, and that his message got through. That great combination of, on the one hand, that one personally can be happy in one's life and lead a rich, happy life personally, and yet, at the same time, be incredibly concerned about our fellow human beings, especially those less fortunate than us. That message from over 200 years ago is as true today as it was then, I think. Right. So thank you, everyone. Merry Christmas. Those of you who want to join us on Christmas Eve, please do. Just register. Thank you, Angie.